It's been an eventful past few days, to say the least, and we know that many of you are eager to hear from Tyler and I about the events that transpired in Pennsylvania. Trust me, that's coming soon. But this week we have an episode that was recorded prior to those events. As many of you may recall, we have 3 to 4 recording retreats per year where we record a batch of episodes, and we typically do that in Houston, Texas. This year, we had an unwelcome guest, Hurricane Beryl. And to say that recording these episodes was a challenge is an understatement. But perhaps the message of this episode has never been more timely. I sit down and I talk with our video producer, Ryan Gentry, who also happens to be a resident of the state of Arizona. And the topic is how to love your swing state neighbor. I hope you appreciate this episode. Hey folks, welcome to an episode of Pass the Mic. I am one of your co-hosts, Dr. Jemar Tisby, and joining me on this very special episode is our very own video producer, documentarian, filmmaker. I'm just adding titles here. Yeah, Ryan Gentry. What's going on, bro?
I'm happy to be here, dude.
Absolutely.
It's a pleasure. I'm back by popular demand, might I add.
Yes, our popular demand at the very least, because we always have to drag you kicking and screaming back onto the show.
A little bit, yeah.
One of these guys who just loves to be behind the camera. Well, come on. It's time for you to get in front of the camera and the mic. We're passing the mic to you. Man, one of the things that we often talk about when you and I converse is the fact that you live in the state of Arizona.
Yeah.
Now, that's interesting for a bunch of reasons, I'm sure.
Or as y'all call it, the West Coast.
I don't call it the West Coast. I don't know who that is.
Tyler hits me with the West Coast all the time.
Well, yeah. I mean, he's from Pensacola, so that says everything you need to know. So just kidding, Pensacola listeners. Listen, what I find interesting about it is it's a swing state. So I live in Louisville, Kentucky. It is, as a state, it votes red. There are pockets of blue as there are everywhere. But it's just in a presidential election year, like all eyes on you kind of a thing. So, I mean, first of all, tell us a little bit about, are you born and raised in Arizona?
Yeah, I was actually born just outside of Detroit. I moved to Arizona.
Oh.
I know, right? I moved to Arizona when I was really young, though. So I claim it. I grew up there since I was like 6 or something. So it's home for me. But I actually didn't know it was weird to look like me and be from Arizona until I started working with y'all. And I was like, Arizona, really? And I was like, oh.
I mean, what's the state's like black population? Do you know?
Small. I knew the number at one point, but
I can't imagine
it's not large.
It's got to be like single digits percentage wise.
I wouldn't be surprised by that. Yeah.
And then your specific area, you're like in the Phoenix metro area,
like Phoenix, Scottsdale. So Scottsdale, very white, very like retired, affluent white community. Phoenix a little bit more diverse, but I'm sort of in between those two.
My goodness. Well, that's one of the things that I find really interesting is as you're growing up, you're sort of thrust into proximity with people who are really different, I think, ideologically. So politically, maybe, right? So let's talk about that in a second. I mean, for me, when I was in high school, it was really only church, because my high school was it's like half Latina, right? And 20-ish% black and white, and then everyone else. And I really didn't get extensive exposure to like white conservative peers till college at Notre Dame, where it was probably a bunch of boys from Scottsdale in there somewhere.
We have a Notre Dame prep down the street. That was one of our.
There it is. Yeah. There it is. There's a pipeline. Yeah. So I really have never. I mean, it's been a steep learning curve for me to try to figure out, and not that I was that political all my life, but interacting with these folks. So like when you were growing up, did you notice these? I'm assuming folks are more politically conservative, like if you're friends with like white guys.
Oh, for sure.
In that
Yeah,
area.
yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned your trajectory and my journey are completely flipped.
Oh,
So
really?
I went to a private Christian school 1st through 12th grade. So one of the only students of color in my class, a very small class also.
Yeah.
For most of my growing years, teenage years, elementary school years. And then weirdly enough, I went to University of San Diego. So not that that's a huge jump in diversity, but like going from, 3 black students to, 30 or whatever is a huge, I was like, oh wow, there's black people here.
Feels
That's
like you went to Wakanda.
Yeah. No kidding. For real.
Absolutely. That small percent going to the larger, anything more, it feels like a big chunk.
Yeah. And so growing up, I wasn't actually very ideologically or politically different than my peers because I was raised in a very conservative Christian schooling environment.
Yeah.
We had Ronald Reagan and then Jesus Christ.
Wow.
And so, yeah.
And it wasn't really questioned. That was just,
it wasn't really questioned because it's school. When you're 10, 12, 16 years old, this is just the things that you're learning. You're not really like institutionally aware. I think that's why it happens a lot for college students. Is
you weren't woke as a 10-year-old?
No, I wasn't. I know.
Come on, you're behind.
The liberals tried their best, dude. They gave the books in the schools.
They didn't indoctrinate you well enough. Yeah. That didn't start to shift for you till like college?
Yeah, college. I went to, I joined the Black Student Union. I joined InterVarsity Christian Fellowship and sort of opened up my lens a little bit.
So wait, InterVarsity was like part of the expansion of it.
Actually,
this is like an evangelical college ministry, but for you,
I mean, my chapter, I was actually I joined the chapter at USD like right after there was this big sort of break there because the staff and a lot of the students there had been very keen on discussing and siding with the protesters during Ferguson, the Ferguson protests, and they had just. Their community had been essentially split in half, if not reduced to even more, because a lot of these conservative white Catholic students had been like, no, that's not for us. So I was actually
Black Lives Matter is not
exactly.
That was the thing.
They basically affirmed Black Lives Matter, and that was a turning point for a lot of students that had then left that chapter. So I'm joining this community essentially at the same time where both of us are wrestling with what does this mean? How do I treat this?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of a key part in the journey.
That is a key part, I think, for a lot of us, right? Like there was a time, and it seems bizarre to say now, but I think there was a time when, especially in church circles, you sort of could get away with not knowing where people stood on particular justice issues, particularly around race, but also even sort of politics writ large. In my circles, these conservative, mostly Presbyterian circles, the assumption was if you're Christian, you're Republican, right? But it was less explicitly discussed, if you will, at least, I don't know, in my church circles. So my recollection is you could sort of rub shoulders with people who it turns out we had deep disagreements with. When Black Lives Matter, but then especially in 2020 and the racial justice uprising around George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, those things crop up. What I've been saying for years now is that churches are declaring themselves. And at this point, when we're recording in 2024, churches have declared themselves, which, by the way, if you're still in a sort of church environment that is opposed to, I don't know, let's say multiracial democracy and equality around race, what more information do we need? I mean, there are some people who are trying to be in there as change agents, yes, but the one point I'm trying to make is those lines are clearer and sharper now than I can ever remember them being. So anyway, so you're in this environment where you're having to interact with people, and even now, right? Because you're still socializing or in some social networks, I assume, that have folks like this. All of this to say, one of the most frequent questions I get is, how do you talk to so-and-so who believes differently, is on the right wing of the political right wing, not correct wing, right wing of the political spectrum, and has bought into straight up lies at this point.
Yeah.
Lies and conspiracy theories and whatnot. First of all, have you ever encountered that just in your not like political organizing, but just your like real life? Are you hearing people say things and you're just like, what? Where did that come from? Like, how can you believe that?
Yeah, so in work a lot, I do a lot of video production, not just for this show, but also locally in Arizona. I work with.
You're stepping out on us?
Yeah, no,
Oh, man.
I wouldn't dream of it.
Wow. This is a shocker. I need a moment. No.
So a lot of the clients that I work with out there are usually, if they're business owners, usually white, usually conservative, just because that's demographically how that sort of lines up out there. And I'll hear takes or terms or just stuff that kind of make me raise my eyebrows, like, oh, I don't hear that a lot. And so then I get turned to like, right, you get me, right? And I'm like, actually, I think X, Y, and Z. So I think to sort of boil it down into an interaction, not an example, but I guess an archetype would be someone would explain, what's a good example? Can you believe these protests are happening in this city or whatever? Israel is a good example. The student protests happening between Israel and Palestine.
Yeah.
What's been really surprising to me in these last few years is that I feel like people, because of the echo chambers of social media, because of the circles that people run in where everybody agrees with them, they're not used to having an idea pushed against at all. And it really, praise God, honestly, it does take just a couple of questions of not even saying, here's how you're wrong, here's how this actually, you're living a lie, but having them investigate that idea a little bit further. Stuff like, oh, well, if it's the students' right to protest and they're spending money at that institution, shouldn't they feel like they hold stake in the behavior of the institution that they're funding? Like, don't you want your taxes to go to something XYZ? And that is almost enough to shake people out of the outrage of going, oh wait, like, because honestly, people just have someone discipling. I know you had a conversation with Caleb Campbell, a friend of both of ours recently. People are being discipled by something or someone. And a lot of times, especially when it comes to these really hot button, triggery issues, someone is waving the red flag in front of the bull. Someone is egging them on, saying like, look at this, look how bad this is. Look, can you believe that this people group, that people group, this party, this people from this country are doing this thing? You need to go stop them. You kind of have to re-inject humanity into that, because like how anonymous it is, they probably typed some horrible thing to somebody over the internet. They've probably scrolled past something. I know I have, where I've scrolled past someone saying something on social media and go, oh, what an idiot, what a clown or whatever.
Absolutely.
Instead of being like, oh, what led these people to this step? So,
and what you're saying is so important. I think so true. Ask the follow-up question.
Yeah.
And the follow-up to the follow-up. And like you're saying, it won't take more than 2 or 3 questions to really uncover. Actually, I think it's getting people to the point of pausing and reflecting on what they're saying, hopefully. Right? Because like you're saying, so much of these deep divides come from very superficial analysis. You're literally reading a headline, listening to a podcast with not even a subject matter expert. So there's somebody who's good at talking and giving opinions, right? So it may or may not have much information backing it.
It's the 24-hour news cycle. They got to have someone saying something at all hours of the day.
Time. And if you ask the follow-up question, it reveals just how superficial this knowledge is, hopefully enough to give people pause. Now, I think you have something else going for you. Even in a sort of business relationship, you're a very likable guy. I think,
thank you.
I think your approach to it, like even if somebody says something like really bonkers, off the wall, racist, bigoted, small-minded, you'll literally say with like a half smile, well, actually, I think something different.
Yeah.
And it's so disarming. Is that, I don't know. I don't know if that's like a prerequisite for engaging these kinds of conversations? Like, you can't be. Have you ever had a conversation that kind of went badly around this?
I've had some stuff said where I've kind of decided, you know what, I don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze on this one.
Okay.
Like, I'm having a work conversation right now. I'm eating a Caesar salad on set. I don't have time to really delve into the kind of stuff you're implying here. So sometimes I just let it be. But I think
did it ever turn like really heated or anything, or was it just like talking to a brick wall and you're like, you know what, I'm out?
It's sort of just talking to a brick wall. I try not to get into anything that's over. I'm pretty conflict avoidant, unfortunately. I'm working on it, but like if it seems like it's getting a little bit heated, I'll just unfortunately back off a little bit because I'm trying to.
Well, that's the tension, and I think that's the reality here. When people are asking, like, how do we talk to a relative, a friend, a coworker, even a pastor or church member about these differences? And by differences, I mean like true justice issues, right? Where you stand on equity for Black people and other people of color, where you stand on, I mean, just let's name it, the 2024 presidential election, which isn't simply between Democrat and Republican, it's between democracy and authoritarianism. We haven't even talked about Project 2025 yet on the podcast, but you know, that is a plan from day one to gum up the levers of democracy so that the president can essentially function as an autocratic ruler. And Trump has bought into that. The current Republican Party leaders are bought into that, and I'm not afraid to name it. But that's where those are the kinds of differences we're talking about. So the questions I get are, well, how do you talk to somebody that's deep, 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 deep down that rabbit hole? I don't know that there's a pat answer. And actually, I found a lot of help with, you mentioned Caleb Campbell before. He wrote a new book called Disarming Leviathan. And it's so helpful because, first of all, Caleb has an amazing biography that I'll have you mention in a second. But one of the central things he says, and he and I did a podcast about this on Footnotes, and I told him he upset me. He made me angry.
Same here when I was first getting into
because every time we get this question, how do you talk to the person who believes XYZ? We want the straightforward answer. And what Caleb is saying in this book is there are no easy answers. The reality is, how do you sort of coax someone into a different and better way of thinking? It's through a long-term relationship, many different conversations, prayer, gentleness, all the things Bible talks about and Jesus talks about, and we don't want to hear.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. But it, you know, the formula hasn't changed. So tell us a little bit about Caleb Campbell.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Caleb's a great friend of mine, and I will absolutely love to delve into the amazing ways that he's helped me navigate conversations with people that disagree with me right after the break.
Hey folks, Dr. Jemar Tisby here. I'm one of your co-hosts on the Pass the Mic podcast along with Tyler Burns. We've been doing this thing for 10 years now. This year's been an especially tough year, if I'm honest, but we do this because of you. And the only reason we can keep doing this is also because of you. So I'm encouraging you to visit patreon.com/passthemic and become a supporter of this show. For as little as $1 an episode, you can keep us going. Visit patreon.com/passthemic.
And we're back with Pass the Mic. Ryan, you were just about to tell us how we navigate these relationships and somebody who's taught you a bunch about this.
Yeah, so Caleb Campbell, he is a pastor at Desert Springs Bible Church in Phoenix, Arizona. That's the church that I attend, actually.
It sounds like you need a tattoo to go to Desert Springs Bible Church.
There are a lot of people with tattoos there.
Yeah. Either you come with one or like you get one like that has the church
We
logo.
all have matching ones, actually. No, I'm kidding.
It would be really cool. I'm just saying. It sounds like a cool. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. I remember going into that church very angry and wanting to debate people. I had left my previous church, a church of really good people that I just didn't really feel a spot for me in, just because demographically, life stage wise. And I wanted a church that was a little bit more oriented towards social justice and people that would openly grieve from the pulpit. This was shortly after the shooting in Buffalo.
Wow.
And my previous church hadn't really mentioned it, and I was frustrated by that. And later on through, like, as I work and think through it, a large part of that is ignorance. It's white people from the suburbs with a couple of kids. And of course that's not on your radar, you know?
Yeah.
I want to change that. But going to Desert Springs, it was what you mentioned, that frustrating reality of when I think of the gospel message and I think of Jesus' ministry, it's very easy for me to look at stories like the rich young ruler that goes to him. And Jesus says, sell all your possessions, give them to the poor, and come follow me. And he walks away dejected because he has a great many possessions. And I look at that story and so, like, sort of selectively hearing, I go, man, if he would only sell all his possessions and give to the poor and go follow him. And I feel like recently I've realized I've missed stuff like the Good Samaritan, loving your neighbor. And it's easy for me to almost tack my American identity on who is my neighbor. Oh, we should love the immigrant coming in. We should love, which is true. We should love the enemies of the state that I reside in, which is true. But I don't actually take that on to my personal relationships or my personal community of if this person has said this thing that's really hurt me, or they like the dude with the red tie, that's also my neighbor. And I was really, honestly, like, cards on the table, I was kind of bummed to have to think about that and go, oh, but really, I don't want to. I just want them to think like me or act like me. Or
so you're talking
like
about the difference between loving your neighbor in the abstract and as a sort of cause, social justice cause, the immigrant category, right? The poor category, right? But coming to the realization that the people in your midst, in your social
my
group,
literal neighbors,
yes,
I have
neighbors.
neglected,
right?
And it was a tough conclusion to reach. But if we are called to live and to love like Jesus, that is something that we are called to do. And I know you and Caleb discussed, like, maybe you're not called to step into those spaces missionally,
Right.
I'm not going to be going to a Turning Point USA rally anytime soon.
Good idea.
Right. But we are called to do that interpersonally, relationally.
Wow.
I believe.
So when you're talking about, so I think one of the things I struggle with is, especially as a Black person, and especially as one who talks about, like, racial justice for a living, I'm not going to put myself in situations where I know I will essentially not simply disagree with someone, right? Like, this is not like, oh, I like summer, you like spring.
Yeah.
No, this is like deeply.
Hey, summer 2024. That's what I'm saying.
Right. I mean, these are deep, like, existential justice issues. I don't feel called to put myself in situations that I know at the end of the day are actually going to not only frustrate me, but actually sort of trigger me in terms of a trauma response because of circles I've been in, whatnot. I don't sense you're saying precisely that. So when you're talking about loving your neighbor, you're not talking about, you're not talking about, like, keeping yourself in toxic situations. You're not talking about,
no.
You're not even talking about agreeing with or finding the middle ground.
Right.
So what do you mean?
I would say loving your neighbor. I'll steal this quote from Caleb once again, just because I think this is a very profound, but it is doing the wisest and most loving decision you can with the information you have at the time. So putting yourself in a literally unsafe situation is not very wise. But I'd imagine, and even operating that at an institutional level, walking into, like, institutional spaces that are not friendly towards you, might not even be wise.
Right.
But literally having coffee with the character, was it Aunt Betty that he mentions? Yeah. Getting coffee with Aunt Betty, or sitting down in the pew for an hour after church and talking to the dude in a red baseball cap. It can suck, but I think that is where we actually not find middle ground, but find the common ground of being bearers of the image of God, and getting a chance to actually see past the Facebook posts, the flags, the selected identities, and getting towards the core identities of the actual similarities, the actual brotherhood, sisterhood, familyhood that we share in
I think
God.
we all have that experience of just like, I can remember we be at a gas station or in line for tickets at a movie theater or something, and you just strike up a conversation with someone like, oh, I can't believe the line is taking so long or whatever. We're just connecting on a human level. I've also sensed the betrayal of even a casual interaction like that, and something comes out like, oh,
that's because of, right. Oh man, it was going so well.
It's going so well. But I will say two things. One, this is a lot of the work of white people, right? So I think just demographically and sociologically, it's white people who are around the folks who are believing these right-wing kind of ideas, right?
Sure.
And so if you're in that proximity, whether your family, your literal neighbors, your coworkers, whatever, there probably is some call that says loving your neighbor means engaging in something that feels uncomfortable, not dangerous.
Yeah.
Uncomfortable, right? The other thing.
That's a great distinction to make.
Yeah, I just came up with that. Uncomfortable, not dangerous, but
uncomfortable, not dangerous.
The other thing I'll say is I know folks like Tim Whitaker of the New Evangelicals. He'll go to a Turning Point USA event. And I know a journalist who for her job and for her writing will go to these events, but they also are white presenting.
Sure.
In case of Tim, he's a male, so there's that. So, but there are people who feel called to literally engage that. And one of the points that we should understand is, even if you're not the individual called to go into those situations, because it is not simply uncomfortable, it could be dangerous. Can we support those people who do go?
Oh, absolutely.
That becomes, I think, another layer of working on the end of building bridges and communicating across divides. We may not be personally the ones who are doing that, but maybe there are people who need our support. Financially, for sure, but prayers, encouragement, whatever that might look like. So I guess I'm just encouraging myself to think about who are the people who are better positioned or even called to engage across these kinds of divides in a way that I'm not called to, but I can support them in their calling. Yeah, that it seems like a reasonable approach.
Absolutely. And it's those people that are working on an institutional level, that we can pray for them, we can financially support them, we can just keep them in our minds, and encourage them, because that's a lot of heavy lifting in that, right? At all levels, it's heavy lifting, but to enter into a space where you're surrounded on all sides by that, and a lot of that's with strangers. I think what we were talking about earlier, you're not really doing that with strangers. You're doing that with people that you have some form of pre-existing relationship with.
That's right.
Which I think is really important. A really important distinction to make is have a pre-existing relationship with these people. These are your literal neighbors that you've had conversations with before, that you have an open door with. If you're showing up with an open door and their door is shut, like, that's okay. It's okay to walk away from that, I feel. But I think of, and it's people that are willing to have this conversation as well. Don't force anything, because that's not going to get you anywhere. It's about finding common ground at a conversation that people are wanting to have. There's a lot of people that are still feeling disillusioned and confused and might be, I don't mean this crassly, like behind the curve in terms of their discovery or their discernment of this process. I was at a discussion group recently where this older gentleman expressed like frustration of, he was like, okay, so this party that I've like trusted my entire life as like the Christian party, I see them doing these non-Christian things and supporting non-Christian people. And he was legitimately frustrated and concerned with that. And instead of being like, yeah, welcome, dude. Like, sure, people have their different pace that they're traveling at, but like, praise God that he's actually taking a serious investigation, a serious look at the people that he's chosen to support, elect, the institutions and the values that he's held up, to actually, instead of leaving them, to sort of fact check them against the gospel and say, oh, this actually is not, we're not operating from the same base level here. We're not operating off of the same values, the same agreements.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, the more I engage in these conversations about how to have these conversations, the more it sounds like evangelism. Now, I know evangelism is a dirty word these days, right? People don't want to proselytize or force their beliefs or anything, but there is a place for sharing the good news, which is ultimately, I think, what evangelism is. And when we encounter people, especially folks who sometimes call themselves Christians, so much of what we're doing in terms of sharing the truth sounds and methodologically is very similar to evangelism, right? You speak the truth in love. They have to have the door open. They have to be willing to have the conversation. If not, you've done your part by presenting the truth. You pray for them. You wish them well. You circle back if they're at another time willing to talk, right? And here's the punchline. It is long, slow, patient work. Sometimes it comes in an epiphany, but that's probably going to be the exception, not the rule. So, I mean, just to wrap this up, I think that especially as we hurtle toward November and the presidential election, there are people who are deep, deep, deep in this. They've attached their identities to this, and they're not going to budge in a short amount of time. But there are people who, like you were saying, have, a relatively passing understanding of what they profess to believe so deeply, politically and socially, where the second question or the third question might reveal an opening. And then there's always room for the long, slow, patient work of really just loving your neighbor, as you said. And I think one of the things that we do to love our neighbors is to share our perspective. I think one of the things I always say to myself is we owe each other the truth. We owe each other the truth, even if it's not capital T truth, universal truth. We owe each other the truth of our own perspective and our own experiences. And I think when we do that, that is what is required. As for changing hearts and minds, that's God's job. Presenting the good news, presenting the information. Yeah, we do have a responsibility there. And who knows, there might just be shifts and changes that you never would have expected. Yeah. So thanks for telling us about the great state of Arizona.
Just a little bit, yeah. Little fun facts here and there.
Yeah, and what we can do to talk to, in a loving way, our neighbor who disagrees.